I still remember the sound my boots made that night, the soft crunch of snow that somehow felt too loud in the silence. Winter has always been quiet where I live, but that night it felt hollow, like the world around me was holding its breath. I was heading back to the cabin I rented for a weekend away, thinking a little solitude might help clear my head. I didn't expect the kind of solitude that makes you afraid to hear your own footsteps. The air stung with cold, every inhale sharp enough to hurt. My breath fogged out in front of me, and the beam of my flashlight jittered a little because my hands were shaking. I kept telling myself it was just the cold, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something felt wrong before I understood why. The snow was untouched when I first walked down the trail earlier that day, completely smooth. I remember noticing it because it looked like a blank page. But heading back that night, I saw prints that weren't mine. They were deeper, wider spaced, like someone with a longer stride had been walking behind me. Not beside, not ahead, always behind, tracing the exact same path I took. The trail was empty when I left the cabin that morning. I was sure of it. I stopped for a moment, listening to the wind through the pines. It wasn't just wind, though. There was this faint sound, almost like breathing. Slow, heavy, like someone trying not to be heard. I pivoted the flashlight around, but the trees swallowed the light. Everything looked the way it should, but it didn't feel that way. Not at all. My heartbeat started to climb a steady pulse against my ribs. I tried to reason with myself, maybe another hiker came through, but the prints looked too fresh, too sharp around the edges, like they had been made minutes ago, maybe even seconds. I kept walking faster, ignoring the prickling sensation crawling up the back of my neck like invisible fingers. When I reached the cabin, the porch light was flickering like it was struggling to stay alive. I stepped inside, and the wood floor creaked under me in that familiar, old house way. But then it creaked again behind me. A second pair of steps, softer, slow. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I just stood there breathing in short, uneven bursts, telling myself the cold makes houses shift, the wind moves things old timber talks at night. But the steps behind me didn't sound like timber. They sounded like weight. When I finally forced myself to look, nothing was there. Just the open door letting in a line of snow across the floor. I shut it quickly, locked it, and leaned my forehead against the wood, trying to calm my breathing. That was when I heard it. A faint whisper outside the door. My name spoken like someone exhaling into the crack. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat felt tight, like the cold had frozen the words before they could leave my mouth. I stayed pressed against the door, listening to the wind move through the trees. But underneath it was that whisper again. Soft, careful, almost curious. It said my name the way someone says it when they're standing right behind you. I stepped back from the door slowly, my heartbeat pounding so hard I felt it in my fingertips. Every instinct in me said, "Don't make a sound," so I didn't even breathe for a moment. I waited for the whisper to come again, but the outside fell completely silent. Not even the wind moved. That was somehow worse. The cabin felt colder than it had earlier, like someone had left a window open. I checked them one by one, but they were all shut tight. Still, the air had that frozen bite, as if winter itself had seeped into the walls. My flashlight was still in my hand, and I realized the beam trembled more than it should. I told myself it was just me shaking, but the light flickered once, like something brushed past it. I walked deeper into the cabin, telling myself I needed to calm down, to think clearly. The boards groaned under my steps, but then another groan answered, a second later, not matching my pace. It came from the hallway leading to the bedroom, a long drawn-out creak, like someone slowly shifting their weight on the floor. I stood there staring at the dark hallway. There were no lights in that part of the cabin, just the weak reflection of my flashlight against the old wood. My breath felt too loud in my ears, so I held it again, listening. I could almost swear I heard breathing from the hallway, steady and quiet, like someone trying to match mine. I whispered to myself, "Don't panic," but fear has a way of growing fast, of turning small sounds into something bigger. I stepped back into the living room, planning to stay there until morning, maybe even leave before sunrise. I reached for the fireplace, trying to spark it up for warmth, but my fingers froze halfway. There were wet footprints on the wooden floor. Not snow melting from my boots, these were bigger, darker, and leading from the front door toward the hallway. The same hallway where the breathing sounded like it came from. I followed the prints with my flashlight, and my chest tightened with every step, and they were headed toward the bedroom door. And then they just stopped, right at the threshold, like whoever made them stepped inside and vanished. The bedroom door was half open. It creaked very slowly, as if someone inside nudged it. I took a step back, barely breathing. I should have run, I know that now, but fear has a strange way of locking your legs in place. I just stood there frozen, watching that door move by itself, inch by inch. Then in the dark of the bedroom, something shifted. Not a shape, not a face, just movement, like a shadow adjusting itself. And for a second, it felt like the whole cabin leaned toward me, listening. That was when I heard it again, not from outside this time, but from inside the house, somewhere close, maybe even a few steps away. My name whispered in a slow, trembling breath. I don't know how long I stood frozen in that living room, listening to the sound of my own name drifting out from the darkness. It didn't sound angry. It didn't even sound threatening. What scared me the most was how familiar it felt, like the whisper knew me, knew the way I breathed, the way my name sounded when spoken quietly, almost like it had heard me say it many times before. The flashlight in my hand flickered again, and this time, the beam dimmed enough that the edges of the room seemed to pull away into shadow. The cold in the air kept tightening around me until each inhale burned in my chest. I forced myself to step back one small step at a time, never turning away from the hallway. The bedroom door stopped moving, but that somehow made it worse. I whispered to myself, "You're not alone." But hearing my own voice in that suffocating silence made everything feel more real, more dangerous. I reached for my phone, but the screen wouldn't turn on. I don't know if the battery died or if my hands were too numb to register the touch. Either way, I was blind except for the stuttering flashlight. Another sound crept through the hall. Footsteps, but slower than footsteps, should be like someone dragging their feet gently across the floor. They stopped just behind the bedroom door. I felt the pressure of being watched, heavy and cold like a hand, pressed between my shoulder blades. My breathing became uneven, shallow, fast. My heartbeat was so loud, I thought whatever was there could hear it too. I took another step back, and the wood behind me cracked under my weight, louder than it should have. Then everything stopped. No breath, no shifting, no whisper. Just a deep, unnatural silence. I don't know what possessed me to look away, but I turned for just a second to grab my coat off the wall hook. The flashlight slipped out of my shaking hand and clattered onto the floor, spinning once. In that brief rotation, the beam swept across the hallway. Something was standing in the doorway. I didn't see a face or details, just the outline of something tall, motionless, like a person who had been standing there the entire time, waiting patiently. When the flashlight rolled and faced the ceiling, the silhouette was swallowed by the dark again. I didn't wait to see it twice. I grabbed my keys and bolted out the front door, not stopping to put on my boots properly. The snow outside was brutally cold, the wind slicing through my clothes, but I didn't dare look back. I just kept running until the cabin disappeared behind the trees. When I finally reached the main road, my breath was ragged, my legs shaking so badly I thought I might collapse. I stopped only when I saw the faint glow of a distant streetlight and let myself breathe for the first time in what felt like hours. I called someone to pick me up and stayed on the phone the entire time, repeating to myself that I was safe, that I was out, that whatever I saw wasn't following me. But even then, even standing under the weak light of the road lamp, I could still hear the faintest echo of that whisper buried somewhere in the wind. My name carried softly like a reminder that winter isn't empty. Something walks in it, and sometimes it follows. I'll never forget the way the cold felt that night. Not the usual winter chill, but something heavier, like the air itself was being squeezed out of the world. It happened 3 winters ago, during a week when the snowstorms were so bad that the town roads disappeared under drifts taller than my knees. I was staying alone in a small cabin my uncle owned, helping him keep the pipes from freezing while he was out of the country. It wasn't supposed to be scary, just quiet, just cold. The first night was calm enough, but by the second night, the storm had swallowed everything outside. The wind howled in long, uneven breaths, almost like it was circling the cabin and stopping right at the walls. I tried to distract myself with the radio, but even that kept cutting out, crackling like someone was whispering too close to the speaker. I turned it off, but even in the silence, I kept hearing that same faint static somewhere in the room. I told myself it was nothing. Old wiring, wind pressure, anything. But the longer I sat there, the more I started to hear other sounds buried beneath the storm. Soft creaks on the wooden floor, a slow dragging noise near the back hallway. The kind of sounds you don't notice during the day, but at night they land differently. They take up space. They demand your attention. I tried breathing normally, but every inhale came out shaky. My heartbeat was way too loud, thudding in my ears like it wanted to escape my chest. I kept glancing at the hallway, even though it was pitch black back there. I couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness wasn't empty, that something was standing just far enough for me not to see it. When the lights flickered for the first time, I froze. The bulbs dimmed to a soft orange glow, then brightened again like they were struggling. A moment later, a single loud knock echoed from the back of the cabin. Not on the door, on the inside wall. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. The storm kept screaming outside, but that knock cut straight through it. Then there was another, slightly lower, like someone pressing their palm against the wood and tapping their fingers slowly. I finally grabbed my phone, but when I turned it on, the screen stayed black. It had been fully charged an hour earlier. Now it was dead, completely dead. My breath fogged in the air, even though the heater was still running. I didn't understand that at the time, but I should have. The temperature inside the cabin had dropped so suddenly that my hands went numb. I tried calling out, just a simple hello, hoping maybe I'd imagine an answer. But instead, the hallway shifted, not visually, but in sound. I heard a single step, slow, careful, like someone was testing the floorboards. The lights flickered again and almost went out. I stood up without realizing I was doing it. My knees were shaking so hard I thought they might give out. I kept staring into the dark hallway, my breath shallow and uneven. Something was there. I didn't know how I knew, but I did. Something was waiting for me to move. Then, from the darkness, I heard a whisper, not words, just a sound like someone breathing inches from my ear. I stumbled back, but the whisper followed, slipping through the room even though nothing in the cabin was moving. And then, very quietly, the footsteps started again, slow, measured, coming closer. The lights dimmed to almost nothing. And that's when I realized I wasn't just cold, I was being watched. The footsteps stopped right at the edge of the light, but I couldn't see anything, nothing at all, just the outline of the hallway swallowing the glow from the living room. Then the whisper came again, clearer this time, lower, almost curious, and the lights went out. When the cabin went dark, it felt like the air disappeared with the light. I couldn't see my own hands, couldn't tell if my eyes were open or closed. The storm outside rumbled in long, muffled waves, but inside everything was still, too still. I didn't move at first. I just stood there, gripping the edge of the table until my knuckles ached. My pulse was hammering so hard it felt like it was shaking the floor beneath me. I listened, trying to hear anything besides my own breathing, but the silence inside the cabin had a weight to it, like it was pressing against my ears. Then I heard it, a single exhale, not mine, deeper, slower, somewhere to my left, just beyond arm's reach. I spun toward the sound, even though I couldn't see a thing. My breath hitched, my chest tightened. I whispered hello again, but my voice cracked halfway through the word. I wasn't trying to be brave. I just needed to hear something human, even if it was my own voice. But the cabin didn't give me anything back. No echo, no shifting boards, nothing. I took one small step backward and felt the cold floor through my socks. Then another breath came, this time behind me, warmer, like someone leaning close enough for their breath to touch the back of my neck. I felt every hair on my body stand up. I didn't think, I just moved. I reached out blindly until my hand hit the wall, then slid along it until my fingers found the light switch. I flicked it up and down. Nothing happened. The power was out. My heart was racing faster now, the kind of panic that makes your vision pulse even in darkness. I forced myself toward the kitchen, where I knew a small emergency flashlight was stuck in the junk drawer. I bumped into a chair, nearly tripped over it, caught myself on the counter. Every sound I made felt too loud, like it was announcing where I was. Just as my fingers brushed the edge of the drawer, something moved behind me. Not a breath this time, not a step. More like the slow drag of fabric on wood, as if someone's coat brushed along the wall while they shifted position. I froze. My lungs burned from holding my breath, didn't turn around. I didn't want to see anything if the flashlight didn't work. I just yanked the drawer open, grabbed the small metal cylinder, and flicked the switch. A weak beam of white light sputtered to life. I exhaled in relief and lifted the flashlight. The beam shook wildly because my hands were trembling, but the kitchen was empty. The hallway was empty. The living room was empty. But the floor? There were footprints on the wood. Not shoe prints, not bare feet. The shape was wrong. Too long in the heel, too narrow at the front, like someone had walked through the room on half-formed feet and dragged the rest of their shape behind them. I stepped back, my heartbeat thudding in my temples. The footprints led from the hallway to where I had been standing in the dark. Then they stopped, right behind me. My chest tightened so sharply, I almost dropped the flashlight. I backed away until I hit the wall. My breaths were shallow and uneven, fogging the cold air. The room felt smaller, like the cabin itself was leaning in. Then the temperature dropped again, not gradually, instantly. So fast that I felt the cold wrap around me like a pair of hands. That was when the flashlight pulse flickered. Once, twice. Then the beam caught movement. At the very edge of the hallway, just where the light barely reached, something leaned forward. Not a full body, just the suggestion of a face, too tall to be human, bending down as if trying to study me. I couldn't see eyes, couldn't see features, just the outline, matching the darkness behind it, but darker still, and it moved again. Slow, smooth, like it wasn't stepping but sliding toward me. The flashlight flickered harder. The beam dimmed to a thin, shaking thread of white, and for the first time that night, I heard it make a sound, a quiet, broken whisper. A sound like something trying to copy a human voice, but not understanding how the words should feel. It said my name. Hearing my name in that warped whisper was the moment everything inside me collapsed. My legs nearly gave out. My breath slipped out in a sharp panic, and for a second, I swear my vision blurred, even though the room was still almost completely dark. I didn't answer it. I couldn't. My throat had locked up. My mind was repeating one single thought over and over like a warning siren. Get out, get out, get out. The flashlight in my hand gave one more weak flicker, and for a split second the beam grew brighter, bright enough to see the thing more clearly. Not its features, not exactly, but its outline. It was taller than the doorway behind it. Its shoulders too narrow, its posture bent as if its spine didn't match the shape it was using. Its hands hung low, fingertips grazing the floorboards, like they were feeling for something, or reaching for me. The moment the light hit it, the whisper stopped. The cabin went so quiet, I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. The storm outside faded into a dull hum. It was like everything froze. Then the flashlight went out completely. I didn't wait. I didn't think. My body took over and I ran. Not toward the front door, because the creature was between me and it, but toward the small bedroom near the back of the cabin. I slammed the door shut behind me, twisted the lock, and pressed my entire weight against it. The room was colder than the rest of the house. My breath fogged instantly. I could barely feel my fingers. My heart hammered so fast that each beat felt like a separate stab of pain. On the other side of the door, the floorboards creaked. Slow, deliberate, almost thoughtful steps. I held my breath, praying the lock would hold, praying it couldn't figure out how the door worked, praying it wasn't already standing right behind me. The footsteps reached the door. Then they stopped. For a moment, the only sound was the wind howling outside. Then something pressed against the wood. Not a hand. Something broader, heavier. I heard the faintest scrape along the surface like claws testing the grain. I shut my eyes and tried not to make a sound. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the pressure disappeared. The footsteps moved away. Slow at first, then fading entirely. I waited there for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. Eventually, the heater kicked back on with a low rumble. The lights in the cabin flickered once, twice, then steadied to a warm glow. The air lost that crushing cold. My phone vibrated on the nightstand, screen lighting up like nothing had ever happened. I didn't leave the room until morning. When I finally stepped out, the cabin looked normal, completely normal. No footprints, no scratches on the door. Nothing moved or broken or out of place. If it weren't for the fact that I could still feel the cold in my bones, I might have convinced myself it was a nightmare brought on by isolation and the storm, some hallucination caused by stress and darkness. But as I packed my things, getting ready to leave the cabin for good, I found something in the hallway beneath one of the floorboards. Something small, wedged into the crack like it had been dropped or left behind. A single, thin piece of ice, perfectly shaped, almost like a fingertip. It didn't melt, not even when I held it in my hand. I left it there. I didn't take anything with me, and I haven't gone back since. But sometimes, during winter nights when the temperature drops too fast or the power flickers, I swear I can still hear it. That breath behind me, that whisper trying to shape my name. And every time, I wonder if the thing in the cabin ever left at all. There's one night from last winter that I try not to think about, because every time I do, I get that same cold spike down my spine that I felt when it happened. It was supposed to be a simple favor for a friend, just checking on his family's old mountain lodge while he was overseas. He told me the place had been closed up for years, but that the heating system needed to be tested before they rented it out again. I figured it'd be an easy overnight stay, quiet, peaceful, maybe even cozy, if the heater still worked. The drive up the mountain was already unsettling. Snow had been falling for days, and the road was covered in a thick layer of untouched white. No tire tracks, no footprints, just endless snow piled on the pines, bending the branches low like they were booing under the weight. My car heater couldn't keep up, and the cold kept creeping under my jacket, making the hairs on my arms stand on end. When I finally pulled up to the lodge, the first thing I noticed was how incredibly silent everything was. No animals, no wind, just heavy, muffled winter air. I remember standing there with the keys in my hand, realizing I could hear my heartbeat echoing inside my ears. That kind of silence never feels natural. Inside, the lodge was darker than I expected. Even with the curtains open, the snow outside didn't reflect much light in. The floors creaked under every step I took, and for some reason, I kept finding myself turning around, like I expected someone to be behind me. There was nobody, of course, but I couldn't shake that prickling sensation at the back of my neck. I went to the basement to get the heat running, and the steps groaned beneath my weight, old wood complaining with each movement. When I reached the bottom, I swear I heard another creak behind me, lighter and slower, like someone following me down. I froze and held my breath. My chest tightened until it hurt, but nothing else moved. So I pushed the thought away and got the furnace working. By the time I came back upstairs, the temperature had risen just enough for the glass windows to fog slightly. That helped me relax a little. I made myself some tea, sat at the wooden table, and listened to the settling noises of the building. Except some of those noises didn't sound like settling. At one point, I heard the faintest tapping along the upstairs floor. Soft, unsteady, like bare feet on cold wood. I told myself it was the expanding beams, or maybe old pipes shifting in the walls. But the tapping kept coming back, always in short, uneven rhythms, almost like hesitant steps. My breathing grew shallow without me realizing it. Every inhale felt like I wasn't getting enough air. My hands started shaking, and each time the lodge creaked or popped, my heart jumped hard enough to sting. Around midnight, the lights flickered. Not a quick flicker, but a slow dimming, like the power was being drained rather than disrupted. The heater let out a low hum that dipped into a strange, almost groaning sound. And then I heard it, a soft exhale from upstairs. Not the wind, not the building, a breath, slow, human, except I was alone. I stood up slowly, trying not to make noise. My chest felt hot from panic, even though the air was freezing. I listened again, and the breath came one more time, longer now, like whoever it belonged to was standing still and waiting. I didn't dare go upstairs. I stayed by the table, gripping the edge so hard my fingers went numb. My heartbeat pounded louder than the wind outside, and for a moment I thought I saw a shadow shift at the top of the stairs. Just a slight movement, like someone leaning closer to look down at me. The lights flickered again, and the floor above me creaked, one slow step, as if whatever was up there had grown tired of waiting. The step above me was so soft that, for a moment, I wasn't even sure I'd heard it. But then the next one followed, slightly heavier, pressing just enough weight into the wood to let me know it was real. I felt a tremor run through my legs, that instinctive kind of fear that hits before you can even make sense of it. I forced myself to breathe slowly, but each inhale came out shaky. My fingers were stiff from how tightly I was gripping the table. I kept staring at the top of the staircase, where the hallway disappeared into darkness. The shadow I thought I saw before wasn't there anymore. Or maybe it was, and it had just blended back into the dark. Another step, a little closer to the stairs this time. The sound echoed down the wooden frame of the lodge, soft but impossible to ignore. My heartbeat surged so hard my vision throbbed with it. I started backing away from the table, keeping my eyes on the stairs, moving carefully so the floor wouldn't creak under me and give away how terrified I was. I didn't have a weapon. Just the mug of half-finished tea cooling on the table and my phone, which had barely any battery left. I considered calling someone, but the lodge was too far up the mountain for a stable signal. Even if it connected, it would take hours for anyone to reach me in the storm. The next sound wasn't a step. It was breathing, very faint, very steady, coming from the top of the stairs. I clamped a hand over my mouth, feeling my pulse hammer against my palm. The breathing grew louder, not because it was getting closer, but because the lodge had gone so quiet that it felt like the walls were listening with me. The heater's hum softened, the wind outside dulled. Everything was still except for that slow, deliberate inhale and the longer exhale that followed. It was the kind of breathing someone makes when they're watching. The lights dimmed again, just long enough to make the shadows stretch down the stairs like long fingers reaching toward me. When they brightened, something in my chest snapped. I couldn't stay there. I turned and moved, fast toward the back of the lodge, toward the kitchen where I knew there was a back door that opened to the snow. But halfway there, I stopped, because I heard something new. A soft drag across the floor upstairs, like someone's hand brushing along the boards as they walked. It moved parallel to me, matching my direction as if whatever was up there was pacing above me, following my movement from room to room. My breathing became uneven, almost painful. Every step I took felt heavier than the last. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the doorknob when I reached the kitchen. I twisted it. It didn't move. Frozen. The entire door was iced over on the inside. Thin sheets of frost webbed across the wooden frame, glittering in the dim kitchen light. I touched it. My fingers stuck for a split second, like the cold was clinging to my skin. Then, above me, 3 slow steps, right above the kitchen. My stomach dropped. Whatever it was, it knew exactly where I was. I backed away from the door, my breath turning to quick fogs in the air. The ceiling creaked, but not from weight. It was the sound of someone kneeling, settling down, lowering themselves until they were right over me. And then, through the ceiling, came the faintest whisper. Not a word I could understand, more like the shape of a voice trying to form one. I didn't wait to hear it again. I ran. I sprinted toward the living room, nearly slipping on the rug as I grabbed my bag and yanked the front door open. A blast of freezing air hit me so hard I almost fell backward. The snow outside was still pouring down in thick sheets, and the wind cut across my face like tiny needles. But I didn't care. I just needed to get out of there. I stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door closed behind me. The wood thudded shut, muffling the sounds inside. The storm roared around me, but even then I thought I heard something from within the lodge. A sudden, sharp creak, then a lighter one, closer to the door. I forced myself down the steps, boots sinking deep into the snow. The path to my car was half buried, but I didn't stop. My breath came in quick bursts that felt like knives in my lungs. When I reached the car, my hands were shaking so violently that it took multiple tries to get the key into the lock. I turned it. The door opened. I jumped inside and slammed it shut, locking all the doors. For a moment, I just sat there, shaking, heart pounding, breath fogging the inside of the windshield. I didn't look back at the lodge. I didn't want to see anything standing in the doorway. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine didn't start. A weak click, then nothing. I swallowed hard, trying again. The engine sputtered for a moment like it wanted to cooperate, then died. The lights on the dashboard flickered once, then went dark. My chest tightened, panic rising like a wave. I slapped the steering wheel and tried again and again, each time more desperate than the last. The storm outside grew louder, the wind howling through the trees like a warning. Then something made me freeze. Through the snow-covered windshield, I saw movement, not from the lodge, closer. A faint shape was standing near the porch, tall and still, barely visible through the storm. Too tall to be my friend, too tall to be anyone I knew. And the longer I stared, the more I realized something was off about its outline, like its limbs were too long or its posture was slightly bent in a way a human shouldn't be. It didn't move, not at all, just watched. My heartbeat hammered so loudly that I felt it in my throat. My breath quickened into sharp inhales. My fingers numbed around the key. I couldn't stop staring at the figure, afraid that if I blinked, it would be right next to the car. Then slowly, the shape shifted, not forward, not backward, just a tilt of the head, like it was curious, like it recognized me. I turned the key again. The engine roared to life so suddenly it made me jump. I didn't hesitate. I slammed my foot on the gas, the tires spinning wildly in the snow before finally catching grip. The car lurched forward, fishtailing as I tore down the road, not daring to look into the rearview mirror. It wasn't until I was halfway down the mountain that I finally glanced back. The road behind me was empty. No figure, no lodge in sight, just swirling snow. I reached town shaking so hard I could barely speak. I told my friend the heater worked, but the lodge was too creepy to stay in. I didn't mention the breathing, or the steps, or the figure in the snow. A week later, he called to say something strange. When the inspection team arrived to clear the place for rental, they found the back door frozen shut from the inside. Thick ice, like it had been that way for months. But what bothered him most was the trail they found in the upstairs hallway. Patterns pressed into the dust. Not quite footprints, not quite handprints. Something in between. He laughed, saying old buildings make weird marks. I didn't laugh back. Because sometimes, on cold winter nights, when the temperature drops without warning and the house goes a little too quiet, I swear I hear that same soft breathing behind me. Slow, steady, patient. And every time, I wonder if whatever was in that lodge followed me down the mountain. I didn't plan on telling anyone this story, because even now I'm not sure if I actually lived through it or if my mind was playing tricks on me. But every winter, whenever the temperature drops below freezing and the nights get unnaturally quiet, the memory comes back with this sharp, cold clarity that makes it impossible to dismiss. It happened during a volunteer search and rescue trip last year. A hiker had gone missing somewhere near the northern ridge, a place where the trails are thin and the snowfall gets knee-deep even on calm days. Our group split up to cover more ground, and I ended up taking the path closest to the old fire lookout, the one everyone said was shut down decades ago. The snow was coming down in slow, heavy flakes, the kind that don't fall so much as drift toward you. My boots crunched loudly with each step, and after a while, that sound was the only thing I could hear. Even the wind had died. The forest just listened. I checked my map, called out the missing hiker's name, listened for an answer. Nothing, not even an echo. It felt like the trees were swallowing the sound whole. The deeper I walked, the more my nerves tightened. I kept thinking I heard faint cracks in the snow behind me, like footsteps matching my pace. Every time I turned, there was nothing but the same endless white. I told myself it was just branches shedding snow, just the cold messing with my ears. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, that crawling sensation at the back of your neck when someone stands too close. Half an hour later, the sky darkened faster than it should have, like a storm was forming out of nowhere. The trees cast long, strange shadows across the snow, and for a second I thought I saw a figure standing between them, tall, still, facing me. I looked again, and it was gone. My heart started beating too fast, the kind of thumping you feel in your throat. I tried to calm myself by focusing on the lookout tower ahead, a small shape on the ridge, a safe point, somewhere with shelter. But as I approached it, the snow seemed to fall quieter, heavier, like the whole forest was holding its breath. Every crunch of my boots felt wrong, too loud, too alone. When I reached the base of the tower, the first thing I noticed was the door. It was open. Not wide, just pushed enough that the wind should have moved it. Except there wasn't any wind. Not anymore. My breath fogged in front of me, each exhale shorter than the last. The air felt colder inside the tower than outside, which made no sense. I stepped in slowly, my gloves brushing the old wooden railing. It groaned under my touch. Inside, the air was so still that every tiny sound echoed. I heard faint creaking from above, the kind of noise old wood makes when someone shifts their weight, or when something moves. My breathing quickened. The creaking came again, directly overhead. I swallowed and lifted my radio, trying to call the team, but all I got was a burst of static. Not regular static either. More like whispering under it. Soft, indistinct, too close. The hair on my arms rose instantly, even under the thick jacket. Then from upstairs, I heard slow footsteps. Not heavy, but careful. Like something didn't want me to know it was there. I took one step back. The footsteps paused. My pulse hammered in my ears. I shifted again, testing the floor, and the steps above me mirrored mine a half-second later. It felt like something was waiting, listening, matching me. And then the light bulb at the top of the stairs flickered once, twice, then went out completely. As the darkness settled, another sound replaced the footsteps. Breathing, right above me, slow and deliberate. The breathing above me was so steady that, for a second, I thought maybe I was imagining it. But then it shifted. A soft inhale, a longer, heavier exhale. Not rushed, not panicked, calm, almost curious. I pressed my back against the wall, trying to steady my own breath, but it kept coming out in short, shaky bursts. My gloves were damp with sweat despite the freezing air. Each second felt stretched and warped, like time was getting pulled thin. I kept staring up the staircase, even though I couldn't see anything beyond the first few steps. The darkness at the top wasn't the normal kind you get from low light. It felt thicker somehow, dense, like it was hiding something that didn't want to be seen. Something shifted above me, not footsteps this time. A soft dragging sound, like fabric brushing across old floorboards. My heart jumped into my throat. I fumbled for my flashlight, flicked it on, and aimed it up the stairs. The beam wavered because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The stairs were empty. Nothing there. Nothing moving. But the breathing didn't stop. It echoed faintly through the walls, like whatever was making it wasn't just upstairs anymore. Like it was closer, surrounding me, choosing a direction. I didn't want to stay in the tower, but stepping back out into the dark forest suddenly felt worse. At least inside I could see the door. Outside, the snow swallowed everything. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and took one slow step backward toward the exit. The floorboard under me let out a loud creak, and immediately, the dragging sound above me stopped. Everything went silent, completely, suffocatingly silent. I froze in place, chest tight, breath quickening again. I waited for another sound, anything, but the tower stayed dead still. Just when I started to think maybe it was over, a new sound slipped through the silence. A voice, low, muffled, impossible to tell if it was a man or woman. It didn't say a word, just a soft, humming sound, slow and uneven, the kind of sound someone makes when they're distracted or focusing on you. My stomach twisted painfully. I felt this sudden urge to run, but my legs felt like they'd been filled with concrete. I forced myself toward the doorway 1 inch at a time, barely breathing, terrified that any noise would bring whatever was upstairs down the steps. When I reached the threshold, I exhaled in relief. The cold air outside swept over me, sharp enough to sting. I stepped out into the snow. Then the humming stopped. Instantly. Behind me, in the tower, the boards above groaned with sudden weight. One heavy shift, then another. And then something started coming down the stairs. Slow at first, then faster. I didn't look. I bolted into the trees, flashlight beam shaking wildly in front of me as I plowed through knee-deep snow. Branches snapped under my boots. My breath tore out of my chest in ragged gasps. Behind me, I heard the tower door slam open with a crack that echoed through the forest, and something stepped outside. I didn't dare turn around, but I could hear it moving behind me. Not running, not stomping, just walking, calmly, steadily, as if it knew I wasn't getting far. Every crunch in the snow behind me matched my pace. When I slowed, it slowed. When I sped up, it responded with perfect timing. The sound wasn't heavy like boots, and it wasn't light like barefoot steps. It was wrong, somewhere in between. My lungs burned, my legs shook from exhaustion and cold. I didn't even know if I was running in the right direction anymore. The snow had turned into a white blur. The trees all looked the same. I risked a glance over my shoulder. Just a quick one. I didn't see a person. I didn't see an animal. I didn't see anything. But I felt it. The same way you feel someone standing too close behind you, even when you can't see them. A sudden gust of icy air swept past my ear, freezing the sweat at my temples. It felt like breath, not mine, cold enough to sting. I pushed forward harder, My flashlight flickered with every jolt of my footsteps. The beam bounced off the snow and trees in erratic flashes, lighting the forest in broken snapshots. In one of those brief flashes, I saw something between the trees. A figure, tall, wrongly proportioned, facing me. When the light flickered again, it was gone. My heartbeat was pounding so violently that my vision pulsed with it. I was gasping now, each inhale sharp and painful. The icy air sliced down my throat. My fingers had gone completely numb. Then, through the wind, I heard it again. The humming. Soft, slow, closer than it had ever been. My stomach dropped. I stumbled forward, nearly falling as my boot caught on an unseen branch under the snow. I caught myself on a tree trunk, and for the first time, I heard something else. Breathing, right behind me. Not a single inch of space between us. I spun around, raising the flashlight. The beam shook violently across the trees. Nothing. No figure. No footprints except my own. No shift in the shadows. But the breathing continued, right there. I screamed for help, but the sound died in the cold. The forest swallowed it whole. Then, suddenly, the humming stopped. So did the breathing. And just like that, everything went silent again. Completely still. I didn't run anymore. I sprinted, half falling, half dragging myself through the snow, until finally I saw the lights of the search team's camp flickering through the trees. Warm, yellow, human. When I staggered into the clearing, one of the rescuers rushed toward me, asking where I'd been, why I looked so pale, if I was injured. I tried to explain, but the words wouldn't come out right. They sounded insane even to me. They didn't find the missing hiker. They didn't find footprints around the lookout tower. They didn't hear humming. They didn't hear breathing in the static. One of them even joked that I probably scared myself in the dark. But I know what I heard, what I felt, what followed me. And sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment during winter nights, I swear I hear that same soft humming drifting through the vents. Faint, patient, like something still knows exactly where I am. I'll never forget the night the cold felt like it was breathing with me, not around me, with me. It happened 2 winters ago, during one of those storms that shuts down the whole town. The kind where the power line starts swaying and the wind claws at the windows, like it's trying to get in. I was living alone back then in a small rental cabin on the edge of the woods. Cheap place, thin walls, terrible heating. The storm hit while I was making late dinner. The lights flickered twice, then went out completely. Just this heavy darkness wrapped around the whole room. I remember standing there for a moment, waiting for everything to come back on. It didn't. The temperature in the cabin dropped fast. You know how you can feel cold settle into a room, almost like a presence pressing against your skin. It was like that, but sharper somehow. I grabbed my flashlight and clicked it on. The beam was weak and narrow, barely pushing back the dark, but at least it was something. That was when I heard the first sound. Not the wind, not the storm, and this was inside the cabin. A soft creak from the hallway floorboards, the kind a person makes when they shift their weight. I froze. My breath stuck somewhere in my throat. I told myself it was just the wood contracting from the temperature drop, but I didn't believe it. The cabin had made plenty of noises before, but nothing like that. This one felt intentional. My heartbeat started picking up, heavy and slow. You know that feeling when your own pulse starts to echo in your ears? That was happening to me. I took a step toward the hallway, raising the flashlight. My hand was shaking so badly the beam trembled against the walls. The hallway was empty, just a long stretch of dark, but the cold there felt different, thicker, heavier, like something was standing in it. Then came the second sound, a faint tapping, rhythmic, coming from the far end of the hallway near my bedroom. I whispered hello even though I don't know why. Maybe I thought someone had broken in. Maybe I hoped it was something normal. I got no response. The tapping stopped, replaced by something worse. Breathing slow, measured, not mine. I felt it before I heard it. Warm breath against the icy air, like someone exhaling right in front of my face. My chest tightened so hard I could barely breathe. I stepped back without meaning to, just instinct. The flashlight blinked for a second like the batteries were dying. The breathing grew softer, as if it were drifting backward into the darkness of the hall. I didn't want to follow it. God, no. But every part of me felt like the longer I waited in that room, the worse things would get. So I took a step forward, then another. The air grew colder with each one. My eyes kept tearing from the temperature and the fear building under my ribs. I could hear my own breathing now, shaky and uneven, mixing with the faint sound ahead. When I reached the halfway point of the hall, something happened that I still don't know how to explain. The floorboards behind me creaked. Not ahead, behind. Like something had just stepped into the hall with me. I didn't turn around at first. I don't think I could have. My whole body locked up, like every muscle understood before my brain did that something was standing there. The air behind me felt wrong, heavier than the cold should have allowed. I could hear the faintest shift of weight, like whatever it was had settled 1 foot onto the wood and was waiting for me to react. My heartbeat was pounding so loud, it drowned out everything else. I could feel it in my throat, in my fingertips, in my teeth. I finally forced myself to turn my head just enough to angle the flashlight behind me. Nothing. Just an empty hallway. But the light didn't reach far. It was too weak, too narrow, leaving most of the space swallowed in shadow. I didn't trust what I was seeing. My instincts kept telling me something was there, right at the edge of the dark, close enough to touch. The floor creaked again, this time off to my right, away from the hall, inside the living room. Slow steps, 1, 2, then silence. My breathing became shallow and fast, and I could hear the fabric of my jacket rustle with every tiny movement. I stepped backward toward the bedroom door, flashlight trembling in my hand. I didn't hear footsteps follow, but every few seconds, the cabin made this soft, popping sound like it was adjusting to someone's weight in the wrong places. I slipped into my bedroom and shut the door quietly, pressing my back to it. The room was even colder. My breath hung in the air longer than it should have. The window had frosted over so thick I couldn't see outside at all. Then I heard it, a whisper, right at the door behind me. Not words, just a single exhale. Slow and steady, I jumped back from the door and nearly dropped the flashlight. The beam cut across the room in a shaky arc and landed on the closet door. It was open a few inches. I hadn't opened it. I know I hadn't opened it. I could feel the pressure in the room shift, like someone else was breathing inside it. The flashlight flickered again, dimming just enough that the shadows seemed to pull closer. Then I heard it, from inside the closet, the quiet, rhythmic sound of breathing. Not deep, not loud, but terrifyingly controlled. As if whoever or whatever was in there didn't want me to know it was breathing at all. I backed toward the corner of the room, every step making a soft crunch on the thin layer of frost forming on the floor. My legs were trembling so hard I could barely keep my balance. I kept the light pointed at the closet, waiting for something to move, something to step out, something to confirm I wasn't losing my mind. The breathing stopped, only for a moment. Then something inside shifted, barely just enough for the closet. Duster to nudge open another inch. A cold draft slipped out, colder than the air in the room, colder than anything I've ever felt. It hit me like a wave, and I choked on my breath, stumbling back. The last thing I remember before the flashlight died completely was seeing something in the dark crack of the closet. Not a face, not a figure, just the faint outline of something standing upright, too tall. Too still, I must have blacked out. Whether from fear or the cold, I don't know. When I woke up, the room was silent. The storm outside had finally stopped. Sunlight, pale and icy, pushed through the frozen window in thin streaks. My body ached with cold. My clothes were stiff. My breath hung thick in front of me. The closet door was wide open. I don't remember standing up. I don't remember crossing the room. But somehow, I found myself staring into that closet. Every nerve in my body pulled tight, like a wire about to snap. It was empty, completely empty. No footprints on the frosted floor, no sign anyone had been inside. Nothing but the cold in there was unbearable, like stepping into a freezer. I closed the door slowly, not because I thought it would help, but because I couldn't stand looking into that darkness anymore. When I stepped into the hallway, the temperature felt normal again. Still cold, but not that impossible cold I'd felt before. The lights came back on a minute later. The heater kicked in like nothing had happened. The whole cabin looked untouched, but near the front door, just barely visible, were two faint prints melted into the frost on the floor. Not boot prints, not footprints, just two long impressions like something had been standing there. Watching me, I packed my things and left the cabin that morning. I didn't even lock the door. I never went back for the rest of my stuff. The landlord sent it in boxes later. I tried telling myself it was the cold or the darkness or my mind filling shadows with shapes, but every winter, when the temperature drops low enough that my breath fogs the same way it did that night, I swear I hear it again, that slow, patient breathing somewhere right behind me. And sometimes, when I wake up before sunrise, I find my closet door open just an inch. I still don't know how to explain what happened that night, but every time winter rolls around, I catch myself listening for sounds I pray I'll never hear again. It started during a cold snap, so brutal, the air felt like needles in my lungs. I was house-sitting for a coworker who lived way farther north than I was used to, in one of those isolated mountain homes where the nearest neighbor is a speck of light across a frozen valley. The house was old, built mostly of creaking wood, and the heating system rattled like it was running on borrowed time. My coworker warned me the place made noises in winter. Wood contracting, pipes freezing, foundation shifting. He said not to worry if I heard tapping or creaking at night. I tried to believe him. The first night was quiet enough. The storm hadn't started yet, and the sky outside was this huge pale sheet filled with stars. By the second night, the wind picked up, not just howling but screaming down the chimney and rushing against the siding so hard it rattled picture frames on the walls. But it wasn't the wind that woke me. It was footsteps, directly above me, slow and steady. I remember lying there in the dark, barely breathing, listening. The ceiling popped and groaned like old wood does, but these sounds weren't random. They moved in a line, heel to toe, back and forth, as if someone was pacing the attic. I tried to tell myself it was the storm, just the house shifting. But the footsteps stopped the moment I sat up in bed, like whoever was up there knew I was awake. The silence afterward was somehow worse than the footsteps, heavy, expectant. I whispered hello before I even realized I'd spoken. The word came out small and shaky. Nothing answered. I didn't know whether to be relieved or terrified. I got up, wrapped a blanket around myself, and stepped out into the hall. The temperature was different out there, sharper, like the air itself had thinned. The house made a soft, cracking noise, then settled again. I took the first step toward the attic ladder and stopped halfway through the motion, because something was breathing, not loudly, not right next to me, but somewhere above the ceiling, a slow inhale, a slow exhale, the kind of breathing that doesn't come from wind or settling wood. My heartbeat jumped. I pressed my hand to my chest to calm it, but it wasn't helping. Each inhale felt tight, like the cold was squeezing my ribs. I kept telling myself to open the attic, to check, to prove there was nothing up there. But then the breathing stopped, followed by a faint tapping, like fingernails on wood. It came from the exact spot above my head. I backed away without meaning to, my feet dragging over the floorboards. The tapping followed me, matching my pace. Every time I stepped back, it tapped closer. The moment I crossed the threshold into the bedroom, the noise ended completely, like someone, or something, had stopped at the doorway, but couldn't enter. I shut the door, then locked it, a pointless instinct, but it made me feel a little less helpless. I didn't sleep. I sat there with my back against the wall, staring at the door while the storm outside grew louder and louder. Around 3 a.m, I thought I heard whispering near the floor vent, too soft to understand, too steady to be the house. I kept the lights on until dawn. The next night should have been easier. At least that's what I told myself. I'd slept a little during the day, convinced the lack of rest had made me hear things that weren't there. But when the sun went down and the house slipped into that winter silence again, every muscle in my body tightened, waiting for the first sound. For a while, nothing happened. I almost started to relax. Then the lights flickered. But the moment the bulb steadied, something shifted above me. Not footsteps this time, but a long dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the attic floor. I stood dead still in the hallway, listening. The dragging ended abruptly, followed by a short, sharp creak, then silence. I took a slow breath and walked toward the attic ladder again, telling myself I needed to check. If I didn't look, I'd keep imagining worse and worse things. The wooden ladder was cold against my hands when I pulled it down. It unfolded with a soft groan. I climbed halfway up and stopped when a burst of cold air hit my face. Not normal winter air. This felt like sticking my head into a freezer. I shined my flashlight upward. The attic was darker than it should have been. My light barely cut through it, swallowed by shadows too thick for a small space. I tried to lean in farther. Then something moved. Not in the beam, but just outside it. A shift, a shape pulling back into the dark, my breath caught in my throat. I couldn't see what it was, but I felt it. The same way you feel someone standing close behind you before you turn around. A presence, watching, waiting. Then the floor beneath me creaked. Not the attic floor, the hall floor behind me, like someone had stepped up to the ladder. I froze. My body went cold all at once. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I just stayed there, halfway between two places I didn't want to be. Then a whisper soft right below me. Not words, just a warm exhale brushing against my ankle. I scrambled down the ladder, nearly losing my grip. When my feet hit the floor, I spun around fast. The hallway was empty, completely empty, but the air around my legs was still warm, like someone had been standing inches from me. I backed into the bedroom again and shut the door, heart pounding so hard my vision pulsed. I pressed my ear to the door, trying to hear something, anything that would explain what was happening. For almost a full minute, nothing moved. Then, very slowly, the floorboards outside the door began to creak. One step, another, soft, measured stopping just in front of my room. Then something pressed against the door, not hard, just enough to make it shift a fraction of an inch in the frame. I held my breath and listened. That breathing came back. Right there, on the other side of the door, a slow inhale, a slow exhale like it was leaning close, listening for me. I covered my mouth with both hands to keep any sound from escaping. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Minutes, maybe longer. But eventually, the breathing faded, not by moving away, but by simply stopping, just gone. I didn't sleep again. When the sun came up, I grabbed my stuff, planning to wait out the day in my car. But before I left, I noticed something at the base of the attic ladder. Small footprints in the dust. Not boot prints, not even adult prints. They looked like a child's bare feet, leading toward the edge of the attic, then stopping abruptly, as if whoever made them just disappeared into the dark. I should have left right then. Driven hours through the snow if I had to. But something about the footprints bothered me so much, I couldn't think straight. They were too small, too clear, and there was no way a child had been in that attic without me hearing a thing. I went outside to get some air, hoping the cold would clear my head. The world was silent except for the wind brushing across the snow. No neighbors, no cars, no animals. Just empty white stretching in every direction. When I turned back toward the house, something made my stomach drop. A figure was standing in the upstairs window. Just a silhouette, still, facing me. The bedroom window, my bedroom. I blinked hard. The silhouette didn't move, didn't fade. I took one slow step backward, and the silhouette stepped away from the window. Not turning, just drifting sideways out of sight. I ran to my car, hands shaking so violently I could barely get the keys in the ignition. The engine struggled but started, and for a moment I thought I was safe, until I smelled something. Warm breath behind me, inside the car. I spun around, but the back seat was empty, completely empty. But the air was wrong, warm in a way that didn't belong in a freezing car. Warm like someone had been sitting there only seconds ago. I put the car in drive and didn't stop until I reached town. I didn't go back for the rest of the week. My co-worker returned to his house, and I didn't tell him the full story. Not everything, just that the house made weird noises, and I wasn't used to the cold. He laughed, said he'd heard noises too, said winter brought strange things into the house, said it always had. Then he told me something that still gives me chills. He said the attic door sometimes opens on its own in the middle of the night. He said he sometimes hears little footsteps running across the floorboards. He said he figured it was just the house shifting. But the last thing he said made my stomach twist. He told me every winter, like clockwork, someone always sees a small shape standing in the upstairs window watching the snow just before the storms hit. He smiled when he said it, like it was normal. I never told him what I saw. And to this day, every winter night, when the temperature drops low enough, I swear I hear breathing behind me again. I'll never forget that night because it changed the way I feel about winter forever. It was the kind of cold that doesn't just sit on your skin, but seeps deeper, settling behind your ribs like something alive. I was staying alone at my uncle's old cabin, a place I always thought was peaceful. But that night, the snow outside looked too still, like the world had stopped moving and I was the only one left awake. The wind kept brushing against the wooden walls, not howling, not whistling, just brushing. Soft, slow, almost deliberate. I tried to tell myself it was normal, just the weather. But something about the rhythm made my chest tighten. Every pass felt like it was dragging fingertips across the outside of the cabin. Inside, the floorboards creaked as the wood adjusted to the cold. At first it was random, harmless. But then the creaks started coming in pairs. 2 steps, pause, 2 steps again. My heart started beating faster because there was no one else inside. And the cabin wasn't big enough for footsteps to echo like that. I sat up on the couch, holding my breath without realizing it. The lights above me flickered once, twice, then steadied, but they seemed a shade dimmer. The silence after that was thick, like the whole cabin was holding its breath with me. Then I heard breathing, not mine, a slow inhale somewhere behind me, steady and controlled, like someone trying not to be heard, but failing by just a fraction. I didn't turn around at first. I just listened, too scared to even swallow. My own heartbeat felt painfully loud, and I was terrified that if I moved, whatever was behind me would move too. When I finally turned my head just a little, just enough to check the hallway, all I saw was darkness. But the breathing didn't stop. It got closer. I forced myself to stand, even though my knees felt too weak to trust. My breathing was uneven now, short and shallow, like my lungs were refusing to take in the cold air. I reached for the nearest lamp, but the light dimmed again, this time flickering so rapidly that the shadows on the walls jittered like they were trying to crawl out of their corners. I whispered hello. Even though the second the word left my mouth, I regretted it. I didn't want an answer. I just wanted something to break the suffocating silence. But the cabin didn't stay silent. Somewhere down the hallway, I heard another set of steps. Slow, heavy. But these weren't just creaking floorboards this time. These sounded like weight being put down intentionally. A heel, a toe, a shift of balance. My throat tightened as I realized the steps were coming from the room I'd closed earlier. The room that should have been empty. I backed away until my shoulders hit the cold wall. The lamp flickered again. My pulse was loud enough that I felt it in my fingertips. I tried to steady my breathing, but the fear made each inhale come out sharp and shaky. Right as I thought the steps were about to reach the hallway, everything went silent again. Completely silent. The kind of silence that fills your ears so heavily that it almost stings. Then the door at the end of the hallway opened by itself. Not fast, not with a slam. Just a slow, steady push, like someone on the other side was easing it open to see if the room was safe to step into. I couldn't make myself move. I just stared, frozen, as the door reached its full open position and stayed there. The hallway remained dark. Nothing stepped out. Nothing appeared. But I heard that breathing again, not far away this time, right in front of the open doorway. My body reacted before my mind did. I rushed toward the front door, almost slipping on the old rug because my legs were shaking so badly. I pulled the door open, letting a blast of freezing winter air hit my face, but even that cold felt safer than staying inside. Before I stepped out, I made one mistake. I looked back. There was something standing in the hallway. I couldn't see its face. I couldn't see its shape, but the darkness behind it was darker than the rest of the cabin, like it was pulling the light into itself, and it was leaning toward me. I ran out into the snow without a coat, without boots, without thinking. The cold stabbed into my skin instantly, but it barely registered through the adrenaline rushing in my ears. My breath came out in harsh clouds as I stumbled through the thick snow, each step sinking deep, slowing me down. The cabin door slammed behind me. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if something followed. The trees around the property loomed tall and unmoving, branches coated with frost that glittered under the moon. Every crunch of snow under my feet sounded too loud, like it was announcing my location to something I couldn't see. I kept hearing faint whispers carried on the wind. Or maybe they weren't whispers at all. Maybe it was the blood pounding in my ears. I didn't know. I didn't want to know. When I finally stopped running, my chest was burning. I turned around slowly, expecting to see someone standing at the cabin door. But the cabin was dark, too dark, like the lights had been swallowed completely. I told myself I would wait until morning, that I would walk to the nearest road when the sun came up. But as I was trying to calm down, I noticed something in the snow behind me. Footprints, not mine. A second pair, perfectly spaced, perfectly centered behind me, as if someone had been walking in my exact path, matching me step for step, but not leaving prints until they wanted me to see them. They stopped a few feet behind me, and I hadn't heard anyone. My heartbeat quickened again, painfully fast. My breath came out in a shaky cloud as I stepped back from the prints. The snow beside them had a strange texture, like something had brushed its surface without weight. I don't know what happened after that. I don't remember running. I don't remember falling asleep in the woods either. All I remember is waking up at dawn, half buried in snow, freezing and confused, with no prints around me at all, not even my own. The cabin was still there, but the door was wide open again. And even from a distance, the darkness inside looked wrong. I haven't gone back since that night. But sometimes, on cold winter evenings, I swear I can hear breathing behind me again. And every time I turn around, all I see is snow. I should tell you this straight from the start. I didn't believe in any of that stuff before. Ghosts, spirits, shadows in the snow. I thought people just scared themselves because winter nights are long and lonely. But what happened last December changed the way I look at every silent hallway and every dark window. Even now, when the temperature drops, my chest tightens like my body remembers something my mind keeps trying to forget. It started during one of those nights when the cold feels alive. I was staying alone in my cousin's cabin because he'd gone out of town, and I offered to keep the place warm and check on his dog. Simple, nothing weird about it. I'd done it before. The cabin sits a little deeper in the woods than I like, but it was winter and the trees were bare, so at least I could see the road from the window, or I thought I could. That first night the wind kept bumping against the walls, making these soft, hollow thumps that almost sounded like someone knocking, but not quite. I remember sitting on the couch, the heater humming, my breath visible every time the fire died down for a moment. I kept telling myself I was just tired. It was past midnight, and everything feels a little strange at that hour. I should have gone to sleep. Instead, I started hearing something else. Footsteps, slow ones, on the snow outside. At first, it didn't bother me. Animals wander around all the time. But these steps had weight. You could hear the crunch, then a pause, then another crunch, like someone taking careful steps and stopping between each one. I muted the TV and held my breath. The footsteps kept going, circling the cabin, a full, slow circle. My heartbeat got so loud, I couldn't tell if the sound was coming from me or outside. I told myself to check the window. Just look, just make sure. But when I stood up, the floor creaked under me in this long, drawn-out way, like the cabin itself didn't want me moving. I froze for a second, hands cold even though the heater kept running. When I finally made myself walk to the window, the footsteps stopped completely, not faded, not walked away, just stopped. I don't know why that scared me more than anything. The sudden silence, the feeling that someone knew I was listening. I stayed by the window for a long minute, squinting through the frost on the glass. Nothing moved, no shadows, no fresh footprints that I could make out. Just a still white layer of snow reflecting the weak porch light. Eventually, I told myself it must have been the wind shifting ice on the roof, or maybe the dog moving around outside. I forced myself to sit back down and pretend the noise didn't shake me, but it didn't end there. A few minutes later, I started hearing breathing, faint, uneven, like someone standing just behind me, trying not to be heard but failing in the quiet. My whole body went cold. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I just stared at the floor and listened, trying to convince myself it was my own breathing echoing off the cabin walls. It wasn't. The breathing stopped the moment I moved, and that was only the first night. I barely slept that night. Every time I drifted off, I jolted awake thinking I heard footsteps again, or that strange, shallow breathing. By morning, I'd convinced myself it had just been exhaustion playing tricks on me. The daylight made everything look harmless. The snow outside was smooth and untouched, no footprints at all, which should have comforted me. Instead, it made my stomach twist. If someone had been walking around the cabin, the tracks should have been there. The cold didn't erase prints that fast. I tried not to think about it. I fed the dog, made coffee, and went into town for groceries. The whole day felt normal enough that I actually laughed at myself on the drive back. I even thought about calling a friend to tell them what happened, but I knew I'd just sound paranoid. The second night was colder, the kind of cold that makes wood contract and pop in the walls. The heater struggled to keep up, so the cabin felt dim and slightly damp, like the cold had seeped into the furniture. I kept the lights on longer than usual, telling myself it was because I needed to read something for work, but I barely got through a page. Around 11, the dog started acting weird. He wasn't a nervous dog, but he kept pacing from the living room to the hallway, stopping at the front door to whine under his breath. Not loud, just this low, anxious sound, as if he was trying not to draw attention. I knelt beside him, scratched behind his ear, tried to calm him down, but he didn't want comfort. He kept staring at the door, like someone stood on the other side of it. That was when the creaking began. It came from above me, slow, dragging creaks across the ceiling, like someone walking in the attic. I remember looking up, my breath stuttering in my throat. The attic wasn't supposed to be accessible from inside. You had to go around the house and use a ladder to open the outside hatch. My cousin had told me that months ago when I helped him store some old boxes. No one should have been up there, but the steps kept moving, that same rhythm from the night before. A creak, a pause, another creak. Not rodents, not settling wood. Too spaced out, too heavy. I grabbed my phone but didn't call anyone. What was I supposed to say? I hear footsteps in the attic of your sealed-up cabin? They would have laughed, or worse, they would have believed me and panicked, which would have made everything feel more real. The dog suddenly growled. Not loud, not aggressive, just this deep, warning rumble. He backed away from the door and pressed himself against the wall like he wanted to disappear into it. Then the light flickered, just once at first, a quick stutter, then again, longer this time, almost like the electricity itself was straining against something. I held my breath, I listened, and then I heard the breathing again. But this time, it wasn't behind me, it was above me, right in the attic. Slow and raspy, like someone struggling to breathe in the cold. My chest tightened. I felt every heartbeat like a punch. The dog whined once and bolted into the bedroom, scratching at the bed frame to hide underneath. I wanted to follow him, but I couldn't move. I stood there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the air around me shift. The breathing grew louder, closer to the hatch. I imagined something pressing its face right against the wooden boards, listening back. And then, clear as day, something dragged across the attic floor, something heavy. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat on the couch with every light on, wrapped in blankets that did nothing to stop the cold creeping under the door. The footsteps didn't return. The breathing faded after an hour, but I knew something had changed. The cabin felt different, like I wasn't alone anymore. I wish that had been the end of it. By the third night, I felt like my nerves were peeling apart one layer at a time. I kept telling myself I should just leave, drive back to the city, call my cousin and tell him his cabin gave me the creeps. But something about the place made it hard to act on that thought. Not fear exactly, more like a pressure, as if the air itself wanted me to stay. The temperature dropped again. I could see my breath inside the cabin, even with the heater running non-stop. The windows were fogged from the inside, which didn't make sense because the air felt too dry for that. The dog refused to leave the bedroom at all. When I tried to coax him out, he growled softly, which he had never done to me before. His eyes kept flicking toward the hallway like he expected something to appear. That night, I didn't turn the lights off, not even one. I sat at the kitchen table scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself. The silence outside was so complete, it felt wrong. No wind, no tree branches scratching, no distant trucks on the road. Just a blanket of stillness so heavy it made my ears ring. At around 2 a.m, the lights flickered again. A long, slow dimming, like something passing between me and the bulbs. My breath caught in my throat. Then I heard it. Not footsteps, not breathing. A knock. One single knock on the front door. Soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. I stared at the door, my pulse thundering so hard my vision shook. No one should have been there. The snow outside would have shown tracks, and I hadn't heard anything approach. But the knock came again, a little louder this time. Not forceful, almost polite. I don't know what possessed me to stand up. I didn't plan on opening the door. I only wanted to look, to prove to myself no one was there. I walked slowly through the living room, every floorboard groaning like it wanted to warn me. The air grew colder with each step, until it felt like I was breathing ice. I reached the door. I listened. Silence. I leaned closer, hesitating, my hand hovering near the handle. That's when I heard it, right on the other side of the wood. A faint, shaky breath. Not mine. My heart stopped. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the rug. For a moment, I thought I saw the shadow of feet under the door. Not a full shape, just the slightest interruption in the yellow glow from the porch light. I blinked, and the shadow was gone. And then something whispered. Just one short word. I couldn't even understand it, but it came from the crack at the bottom of the door, like someone had lowered their mouth to the floor and spoken straight into the room. I backed away as fast as I could. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely grab my phone. I tried calling my cousin, but the call wouldn't connect. No signal at all, even though I'd had full bars earlier. The knocking started again, this time harder, longer, and then it stopped all at once, cut off mid-strike, like a hand freezing in place. I didn't go near the door again. I locked myself in the bedroom with the dog, who was trembling under the bed. I sat with my back against the wall, listening to the cabin settle around me. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear breathing. I didn't hear anything at all. When the sun finally rose, I grabbed the dog, my keys, my bag, and left without even turning off the heater. I didn't look back until I reached the main road. There were no footprints in the snow around the cabin. But when I drove past the front steps, I noticed something that made my hands go numb on the steering wheel. The porch light was still on, but the bulb was frozen over from the inside. I haven't been back since. And sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and winter creeps in again, I swear I can still hear that same soft knock, just once. Gentle, patient, like it knows I'll open the door eventually. I don't usually talk about this, mostly because saying it out loud makes it feel too real. But every winter, when the nights get long and the air gets sharp, my mind drifts back to that week in the mountains. And no matter how much I try to rationalize it, there are moments from those nights that I still can't explain without my hands starting to shake. I was house-sitting for a family friend at a cabin near an old ski route that hadn't been used in years. It was supposed to be simple. Watch the place, run the generator, keep an eye on the pipes so they didn't freeze, the kind of quiet retreat people crave in the city. I thought I'd use the time to catch up on sleep and maybe write a little. But the quiet wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that felt too complete, like something had pressed its hand over the mouth of the forest. The first night, the cold was brutal. Every window frame made this subtle ticking sound where the wood shrank against the screws. At around midnight, I heard what I thought was the wind dragging ice along the siding. Slow, scraping, almost like fingernails trailing down wooden slats. I tried to ignore it, pulled my blanket tighter, listened to the heater chug along like it was trying too hard. Then I heard a thud on the porch. Not loud, not urgent, just a single dull thump, like someone shifting their weight while standing too close to the door. My heartbeat jumped into my throat. I held my breath without meaning to, every sense sharpening all at once. I listened for footsteps, for voices, for anything, but all I got was silence. Thick, heavy silence. After a minute, I forced myself to get up, even though my legs felt weak. The floorboards creaked under me in these slow, complaining groans. When I reached the front window, I wiped a patch of fog from the glass with my sleeve. The porch light buzzed and flickered like it was struggling to stay awake. The snow looked untouched. No prints, no shadow moving, nothing. When I stepped back, I thought I heard breathing behind me. Soft, unsteady, a little too close. I spun so fast, I almost lost my balance. But the room was empty. The only sound was the heater cycling off, leaving the cabin suddenly too quiet. I tried to laugh it off. First nights alone always feel weird. The brain fills in gaps. The mind makes up things to match the cold. But when I lay back down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't completely alone. Every time I started drifting, some faint sound tugged at me. A tap somewhere in the walls, a whisper of fabric shifting, the kind of noises that feel intentional even when you know they shouldn't be. I didn't sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept picturing someone standing on the porch, waiting, completely still in the snow. I told myself I'd feel better in the morning. But I didn't. The second night was worse, mostly because I spent the entire day trying to convince myself the first night had been nothing. By sunset, I was exhausted, but I still felt this tightness in my chest, like the air was heavier inside the cabin than it should have been. I kept glancing at the front door without meaning to, half expecting to see the handle twitch. Just after dinner, the wind picked up. Not strong, just enough to make the trees creak. The kind of creaking that almost sounds like voices if you listen too long. I tried turning on the radio for background noise, but all I got was static. Soft, whispering static that rose and fell like someone breathing into the speaker. I turned it off. When the generator shut off for a scheduled cool down around 11, the cabin dropped into a kind of silence that made me feel small. I could hear the faint pop of settling wood, the soft rustle of my own jacket when I shifted. Every sound felt amplified. And then, underneath all of that, I heard footsteps on the snow again. Slow, deliberate, crunch, pause, crunch. My pulse spiked so fast I felt dizzy. I stood completely still, like any movement would announce exactly where I was. The footsteps circled the cabin, not hurried, not wandering, more like someone pacing with a purpose. I moved toward the nearest window and lowered myself, so only my eyes were above the sill. But the glass was fogged again. I wiped it with my sleeve, harder this time. Nothing, just snow and faint moonlight. The footsteps stopped. Then, above me, the ceiling groaned, a long, dragged-out creak that traveled from one end of the roof to the other. I stared straight up, my breath shallow. The roof wasn't strong enough to hold a person. I knew that, but whatever moved up there wasn't light. The wood strained under each shift of weight. I felt a cold bead of sweat slide down my neck. I told myself to call someone, anyone. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped my phone. But the second I unlocked it, the lights in the cabin flickered. Once, twice, then steadied, but dimmer than before. That was when the whispering started. Not outside, not above me, inside the cabin. Faint, like someone talking through a wall. I couldn't make out words, just a soft, broken murmur that rose and fell. My heartbeat was so loud it drowned half of it out, but I swear there was more than one voice. 2, maybe 3, all speaking in low, uneven breaths. I backed away from the window and pressed myself against the far wall. My breathing was too quick, too shallow, like I couldn't pull enough air into my lungs. The whispering stopped for a moment, and in that silence, I realized something that made my stomach twist. The cold was coming from inside, not just a draft, a genuine drop in temperature that chilled the air around me. My fingertips went numb, my breath fogged in front of my face, even though the heater had kicked back on. Then, clear as day, I heard a single tap on the window behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I stayed staring at the opposite wall, frozen, every muscle locked tight. The tap came again, softer this time, almost like someone gently knocking with one finger. I don't know how long I stood there. It felt like hours. When I finally gathered the courage to move, I didn't check the window. I went straight to the bedroom, shut the door, and pushed a dresser in front of it. I sat on the floor for the rest of the night, knees pulled to my chest, listening for any sign the whispering would start again. It didn't, but the feeling of not being alone stayed with me, thick and heavy, right until dawn. By the third night, I was already on edge, but I told myself I'd get through one more day before leaving. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to seem dramatic. Maybe I wanted to believe the cabin wasn't getting to me. Maybe I didn't want to admit I was scared of something I couldn't name. The daylight hours were calm enough to convince me I'd imagined most of it. No strange noises, no footprints, no whispers. I even walked outside for a bit just to breathe air that didn't feel heavy. But the moment the sun dipped behind the ridge, that pressure came back. The whole cabin felt like it was holding its breath. Around 9, the generator lights flickered again, for just a moment, but long enough to make the shadows in the corners shift in a way that made my skin crawl. I kept the bedroom light on, kept my boots next to the door, kept every instinct in my body ready to run. By midnight, the wind died completely, leaving the air outside unnaturally still. I sat on the bed, listening to the ticking of the cooling pipes. My pulse felt too loud again, too fast, the kind of heartbeat where your ears start ringing. Then I heard it, not footsteps this time. Something slid across the floor outside my bedroom door. A soft, dragging sound, like fabric being pulled or something heavy being shifted an inch at a time. My breath caught in my throat. The doorknob twitched, just barely. A tiny metallic click that sent a shock of ice through my chest. I didn't move. I didn't blink. My hands trembled so hard my fingertips tingled. The dragging sound came again, closer, slower. I could picture it in my head, even though I couldn't see it. Something crawling or pulling itself along the hallway floorboards. The wood creaked under the weight of it. Not loudly, but enough that I could feel the vibrations through the bed frame. Then it stopped, right under the crack of the door. The light in the bedroom dimmed again. A single slow fade, like something outside the room was sucking the warmth straight from the bulbs. My breath fogged in the air. I could hear breathing on the other side of the door. Not soft this time. Labored, wet, like someone exhaling against the wood with their mouth almost touching it. I grabbed my phone and opened the camera just to use the screen as a mirror. I angled it toward the gap under the door. Whole body was shaking. For a long moment, all I saw was darkness. Then something shifted. Not a shape, not a face, just the faintest ripple of movement, like a shadow pulling back. I nearly dropped the phone. My heartbeat slammed so hard it hurt. The breathing stopped all at once. The cold seemed to suck out of the room as fast as it came. The light steadied, and then the doorknob slowly rotated halfway, paused, and gently clicked back into place. I didn't sleep. I didn't speak. I didn't even cry. I just sat there in silence until the sun rose. When I finally opened the door the next morning, the hallway floor was dusted with snow. Not footprints, just snow. A thin, perfect layer, as if it had fallen inside the cabin during the night. I packed instantly. I didn't shut off the generator. I didn't leave a note. I drove down that mountain road faster than I ever should have on ice. I've never been back. And sometimes, when winter rolls in and the nights turn quiet again, I swear I hear that same dragging sound behind my bedroom door. Soft, slow, waiting for me to listen. I didn't plan on telling anyone this, mostly because every time I think about it, my stomach tightens the same way it did that night. But winter does that to me now. The air gets cold enough to sting, the world gets quiet in that strange, muffled way, and suddenly I'm back there again, hearing things I shouldn't have heard. It happened 3 winters ago, when I was staying alone at my cousin's cabin in the mountains. He'd offered it to me so I could have a break from the city, and honestly, I was excited about the idea of a week with nothing but trees, snow, and silence. I thought silence would be peaceful. I didn't realize how loud it can get once you start paying attention. The first night was fine. I unpacked, lit the old stone fireplace, and listened to the crackling logs echo through the wooden room. The place wasn't big, but every sound seemed to stretch out longer than it should. Footsteps, creaks, the wind dragging across the windows like a hand brushing along glass. I told myself cabins just do that. Wood expands, shifts, settles. It was normal. But around midnight, while I was trying to sleep, I heard something move on the porch. It wasn't the wind. It sounded slow, deliberate. A single crunch of snow, then another. My heartbeat picked up before I even fully processed it. I remember holding my breath, waiting for a third step, but it never came. I stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours, trying to convince myself it was just a deer. The next morning, there were no tracks in the snow outside. I checked twice. The surface was untouched, smooth and glittering under the pale sunlight. I felt stupid for getting scared at nothing, so I brushed it off. I tried to enjoy my day. I went on a short walk, made some hot chocolate, even read for a while. By sunset, I was relaxed again, enough to believe that the cabin wasn't as creepy as it had felt the night before. It wasn't until the second night that the real fear started. I had just turned off the lights and crawled into bed, leaving the only illumination from the dying fire. I was lying on my side, half asleep, when I heard the floorboards in the living room groan. One long creak, like weight shifting onto it. The kind of sound footsteps make when someone is trying not to be heard. My eyes opened immediately. My throat felt tight, like swallowing would make too much noise. I listened, every muscle locked in place. For a moment, nothing. Then came another creak, closer this time. I remember counting my breaths without meaning to. 1, 2, 3, each one shaky and shallow. I was trying to convince myself I had forgotten to latch the door, and the wind blew it open, even though I knew I had checked it twice. even though I hadn't heard the door open at all. The fire flickered, casting faint orange light across the bedroom doorway, and in that glow, I saw something move. Just a shift of shadow. Not a shape, not a person, but something. Like the darkness itself stepped out of place for a second, and then slipped back. I felt cold. Not the winter kind of cold, the kind that starts in your chest and spreads until even breathing hurts a little. I didn't dare move. I didn't dare blink. And then, from the living room, I heard breathing. Slow, steady, like someone exhaling just out of sight. I don't know how long I lay there listening, but every second felt stretched thin, like time itself was afraid to move. The breathing didn't sound angry or rushed. It was calm, too calm, like whoever it was had been standing there for a while, just waiting for me to notice. I finally forced myself to sit up. My hands were trembling so badly the blanket shook with them. I told myself to be rational, to check the room, to prove it was just the wind echoing through the cabin. But the moment I swung my legs over the side of the bed, the breathing stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse, thick, heavy, like the cabin was holding its own breath along with me. I stood, my knees barely cooperating, and stepped toward the doorway. The fire was almost out, just a few glowing embers casting weak light across the living room. Everything was still. The couch, the table, the shelves lined with my cousin's dusty old camping gear. Nothing looked disturbed. Nothing looked wrong, but the air felt different, as if someone had just been there and slipped away a second before I arrived. I whispered a shaky hello into the darkness. I don't know why. Maybe part of me hoped someone would answer, that there would be an explanation that made sense and didn't involve what I felt crawling along my spine. No one answered. I checked the front door, locked, checked the windows, all latched. I even checked under the couch like some terrified kid, even though an adult human could never fit there. But fear doesn't care about logic. Fear just pushes you into motion. By the time I finished searching, the fire had gone out completely, leaving me in cold darkness. I didn't want to risk turning my back to the room, so I lit one of the old lanterns from the kitchen. Its tiny flame flickered, barely holding on, but it was enough to give me the courage to move. I should have called my cousin or left right then. I know that. But it was snowing hard outside, and the road to the cabin was already dangerous, even in daylight. Besides, the rational part of my brain kept trying to regain control. Maybe it was the cabin settling again. Maybe I had imagined the breathing because I was half asleep. So I stayed awake a while longer in the living room, sitting near the lantern, listening. My heartbeat gradually calmed, though my chest still felt tight. The quiet grew less threatening. After about an hour, nothing else happened. I almost let myself believe it was over. Then I heard it again, not breathing this time, not footsteps, just a faint whisper of fabric brushing against wood. From somewhere behind the bedroom door, a single sound, soft but unmistakable, like clothing sliding over a doorframe as someone slipped back inside the room I had just searched. My grip tightened on the lantern's handle until my knuckles hurt. I turned toward the bedroom, raising the lantern a little higher, and that's when I saw it. On the wooden floor, near the foot of the bed I'd just left, was a trail of melted snow. Thin, uneven streaks, as if someone had been standing there with frost clinging to them and slowly thawing into the floorboards. The trail hadn't been there before. I stepped closer, the lantern trembling in my grip. The melted patches extended from the bed to the far corner of the room, but when I followed them with my eyes, the corner was empty. No footprints leading away, just melting snow and an impossible stillness. I felt my heartbeat rising again, faster than before, loud in my ears. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to leave everything behind, but the snow outside was too deep, the night too dark. I didn't know where to go. And then, just as I backed away from the corner, I heard something that made every hair on my body stand on end. It was my own voice, whispering my name from somewhere behind me. I froze. Every part of me locked up at once, like my body refused to turn around. Hearing your own name is one thing. Hearing it in your own voice, whispered from somewhere that should be empty, is something else entirely. It didn't even sound distorted or far away. It sounded like me. Close, too close. My first thought was that I was losing my mind, that stress or lack of sleep was messing with me. But then it came again, softer this time, almost curious. The exact tone I use when I'm trying to get someone's attention without startling them. I don't know how I gathered the nerve, but I finally turned, slowly, carefully. The lantern shook hard enough that the flame fluttered against the glass, throwing unsteady shadows across the room. But nothing was there. No one. Just the empty living room and the faint outline of the front door behind it. That should have been comforting, but it wasn't, because the whisper hadn't come from out there. It had come from right behind me, close enough that I should have felt warm breath on my neck. My breathing turned rough and uneven. I couldn't catch my breath, no matter how hard I tried. For a few seconds, I swear the air felt thinner, like the cabin itself was squeezing in around me. I stumbled back from the bedroom doorway, nearly dropping the lantern, and kept moving until the backs of my knees hit the couch. That's when something else changed. The cabin temperature dropped, fast. A sudden sharp cold that bit into my skin and filled my lungs with a kind of freezing sting. The lantern flame shrank, struggling like it was being starved of oxygen. The windows frosted over in seconds like invisible hands had pressed against them from the outside. And then the creaking started again. But this time, it wasn't one or two isolated sounds. It was many, all around the cabin. Floorboards shifting, walls groaning, the faintest suggestion of footsteps moving slowly in a circle around me, as if something walked along the edges of the room just out of the lantern's glow. I held my breath without meaning to. Every muscle burned from tension. The footsteps stopped near the hallway. I aimed the lantern toward the sound, heart racing so hard it hurt. And that's when I saw something I still can't explain. A shape, not solid, not transparent either. A kind of shifting darkness standing at the end of the hall, like the shadows had pulled themselves together and stepped forward. Not human-shaped exactly, but tall, uneven, like it kept trying to settle into a form and failing. It didn't move. It just watched me. Or I felt like it watched me. I could feel its attention, colder than the winter outside, heavy enough to make my chest ache. I whispered a shaky please go under my breath. It felt pathetic, but it was all I could manage. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the shape tilted its head, the same way I tilt mine when I'm confused, the same slow angle, the same silent pause afterward. And in my own voice, quiet and wrong, it whispered my name again. That broke whatever flimsy courage I had left. I bolted. I didn't think about the snow or the dark or the cold. I didn't even grab my bag. I just ran out the front door, slipping on the icy steps, nearly falling face first into the snow. Behind me, I heard a long creak of the floorboards, like something shifting its weight as it moved closer. But it didn't follow me outside. It stayed at the threshold, watching. I didn't stop running until I reached the main road, half frozen and gasping for breath. A passing driver found me and took me to town. I didn't go back for my things. My cousin picked them up weeks later. He never saw anything. Said the cabin felt completely normal. He did mention one thing, though. He said that when he walked into the bedroom to pack my stuff, the floor by the bed was still damp, like melted snow had soaked into the wood, even though the cabin had been empty for weeks, even though it hadn't snowed inside. He laughed it off, said maybe I spilled water and forgot about it. But here's the part I've never told anyone. Every winter since then, usually late at night, when the world outside goes quiet and the cold settles deep in the walls, I sometimes hear it again, my own voice, whispering my name from somewhere I can't see, and every year, it sounds a little closer.